Comparison of salaries of different eras. How much did they get paid in ancient Rome? We all like to count money. Whether it's our own or someone else's, it doesn't matter. There is something magical about these attributes that ensure human life. We decided to make a separate video about the income of workers of different historical epochs, and we hasten to share the results of our research. In this video, in the duel of salaries will converge ancient Greek builder, ancient Roman teacher, medieval English archer, and pre-revolutionary Russian worker. Which of them is easier to pay for housing, and who could call his life comfortable? We will determine the winner in a few minutes, but make it clear that the duel will be humorous. Different systems of measuring currencies and political situations of states do not always allow to judge objectively, so the competition will not be serious and not pretending to the absolute truth. However, your comments on whether you are happy with your salary are very welcome. And we're off to ancient Greece. Literature, philosophy, the arts. We owe almost everything to these working men. Documentaries, games and books love to praise the ancient Greeks and discuss how great they fought and ruled the lands, but the lives of ordinary working people are always left out of the picture, and they are the vast majority in any country at any time. Of course, given the love of the ancient Greeks for writing, we have received data on both earnings and prices. So meet our first guest. His name is Thomas, and he is not a blue blood and works as an ordinary builder. And yes, that's a very common name in Greece to this day. Thomas works in the sanctuary of Demeter and Cora, which is located in the city of Ellipsis, 20 kilometers from Athens. Together with 3 slaves, he lays bricks, working under contract. Yes, in ancient Greece, just like in today's world, construction work was contracted for with strict terms of deadlines and prices. This is the 5th century BC. Enough records have been preserved for bright minds to calculate that Thomas's contract meant a wage of 4 drachmas a day, and that's the minimum, because you only had to work at the pace of slaves to get that kind of money. But let's say our Greek was not overzealous and did get 4 drachmas a day. Looking ahead, we note that Wikipedia will claim a builder's wage of 1 or 2 drachmas, but historians have long since demolished these myths. Those who are interested can read Vladimir Kuznetsov's excellent book on the organization of public construction in ancient Greece, but in brief, Wikipedia is lying here, and we are not. So Thomas, according to clear archaeological evidence, received 4 drachmas a day. Is that a lot or a little? Let's start with an example close to everyone. 1 liter of wine cost half an obol. There are 6 obols in 1 drachma. So, on a day's salary, our Thomas could afford 48 liters of wine. Not bad, is it? Famous Greek sandals could be bought for 6-8 drachmas, and Thomas had to work a couple of days for them, but theater tickets in Athens at that time cost 2 obols. On a day's wage, Thomas could take 12 people for a cultural vacation. Even the laborers who worked together with Thomas in the temple received about 1 drachma. And that means somewhere about 12 liters of wine or 3 tickets to the theater a day. Let's move on to more interesting things. The house of Demosthenes' father, the famous orator, cost 30 minas. In 1 mina, 100 drachmas. The salary of our Thomas, with such an hourly wage, somewhere 100 drachmas a month, taking into account the weekend. That is, the means to buy such a house he earned in net time for 30 months, well, and if you save half of his salary for a house, then for 5 years. Back to the laborers of the time. The figure should be multiplied by 4 and we get 20 years, but again, we are talking about the house of the famous orator, which was very luxurious. Apartments simpler definitely cost many times less, and the housing issue in ancient Greece was not a problem, but you should not deceive yourself either. Don't forget that wine was drunk almost instead of water, and making analogies with the modern world, it is better to take as an example not modern wines, but let's say modern mineral water. To close Thomas's question, let's discuss other prices for random products. A sheep cost 2 drachmas, a calf somewhere around 5 drachmas. A good slave could be bought for 200,500 drachmas, and a visit to a brothel on a luxury program would cost only 1 drachma. It should not be forgotten that slavery was widespread in ancient Greece, but even slaves were paid about half a drachma a day. So, in our humble opinion, the common laborers of the 5th century BC lived very well. We're not even afraid to make the bold statement that in many ways it was better than it is today. Our next guest is an ancient Roman teacher. From the surviving records, scholars have very clear price tags from the wages of the time of Emperor Diocletian. He ruled from 284 to 305 AD. Times were good. After numerous crises, Diocletian returned peace to Rome, and the era was considered almost another golden age of the empire. Meet our hero, Cornelius, an ordinary elementary school teacher in Rome. Yes, the education system, which is so proud of modern countries, the Romans built in the 4th century BC, successfully stole the idea from the Greeks. Children went to it without restrictions on the initial age, but studied until the age of 12. After that, girls married, and boys continued their education. Of course, provided there was money, because the other side of the coin was the private structure of education. Only rich people could afford to educate their children. However, a barber took 2 denarii for a haircut, and a month of teaching a child cost somewhere around 60. So, in general, to give a son for education was not so impossible task. The elementary school taught writing, reading and math. So our Cornelius did a good job and got 50 denarii for each child. Let's say he had 20 in his class. Not a lot, but not a little. So Cornelius was getting somewhere around 1,000 denarii a month. It should be noted that the era was not always stable and prices periodically rose, so that Emperor Diocletian had to issue a special treatise, strictly regulating the maximum price of products and wages. Thanks to him, we know the approximate price tags of those times. However, they were almost certainly much lower in reality. Let's start with traditional wine. A liter cost 8 denarii, and here everything is not so funny as with the ancient Greek. We keep in mind a different value of wine, we are talking about its maximum, not minimum price. And Cornelius still earned 4 liters of elite wine every day. Let's move on and look at the eggs. Cornelius earned somewhere around 30 eggs a day. In Roman systems of calculation, you can break legs, but the maximum price of about 14 kilograms of lentils popular then was equal to 100 denarii. That is, our teacher provided himself with a month's supply of porridge for several days of work, and the shepherd, according to the same document of Emperor Diocletian, for 5 days, for he earned 20 denarii per day. From other prices we can note a chicken for 30 denarii, a kilogram of pork for 16 denarii, and a slave for as much as 30,000. As can be seen from the comparison, Cornelius had no problems with food, but the court proceedings could take up to 1,000 denarii. Of course, let us not forget that this is a time of crisis, but it is obvious that our teacher was not poor. The next client of the program is an ordinary medieval archer, John from Manchester. The year is 1450 and medieval life goes on as usual. Witches are beginning to be burned in Europe. The glorious times of the Roman and Greek empires have long been forgotten, and the world is busy with wars between Christians and Arabs. Our John is on regular service in the Queen's troops and receives 3 pennies a day, which is quite usual for archers of the time. It's worth noting that England's monetary and food system was insane, and it was all about the strict pegging of coins to silver and gold. 1 penny was a coin of 1.5 grams of silver, 12 such coins equaled 1 shilling, and 20 shillings equaled 1 pound. Also, the pound, in addition to currency, was a measure of weight, and almost every town had its own personal pound. The Tower pound equaled 350 grams, the Troy pound 370, and the London pound 450. In addition, merchants and jewelers had their own pounds. And in general, almost every merchant counted as he pleased. The same was true of liquids and cereals. They were measured by gallons, and if grain gallon was equal to 4.4 liters, then wine gallon was smaller and was 3.8 liters, and beer gallon was 4.6 liters. That's why price analogies turn into a hell and inevitably carry an error, which we will leave out of the picture, trying to translate all the goods into usual liters and kilograms. Ale cost half a penny per liter, which means that our archer John could afford 6 liters at once on his daily salary. Also, 1 penny could buy 4 loaves of bread or 24 eggs. A pound of beef would cost our John chapter 5 pennies, and a pound of cheese only 1 penny. A sheep cost 12 pennies, but the price of cows was up to 100 pennies. But in general, food was not a problem, for on the same penny a day you could eat and pour ale. Taking into account the life in the barracks, John was provided with housing for the time of service and had an extra 2 pennies a day, which he could save. How much, then, would he have saved for an apartment in a village near Manchester? Not much, for it could be bought for 400 pennies, unless of course he went mad from transferring money in pounds in the process. It is worth noting that housing was not the most expensive expense of those times. For example, to study at Oxford, you had to give more than 1,500 pennies, that is, about 4 times more than for a house. The last guest on our list is an employee of one of the ordinary factories of St. Petersburg, Vasily. The year is 1913, the First World War is not long away and the worker dreams of a bright future. Can he afford it? Thank God, there is a lot of information from those times. According to official data, the average salary of such workers was 24 rubles a month. Well, and the prices for anything, perfectly preserved until now. Wine is not honored in his country, so we have to start with beer. On average, cheap beers cost about 10 kopecks per liter. 100 kopecks 1 ruble, that is, on his daily salary, Vasily could buy about 8 liters of beer. There was a signboard of the restaurant Progress, which invited everyone to pay for a full lunch with a change of dishes for 40 kopecks, that is for about half of Vasily's daily income. Since we were talking about cheese in the John example, Vasily could get a little more than a kilogram of cheese for his daily wage. Archer John, in the years before Vasily, bought 1.5 kilograms. On a day's wages, John took 72 eggs, and Vasily somewhere around 40. However, due to the different professions, the comparison is not quite correct. However, you can see that our worker from the factory could eat quite well and tasty, because if we go to simpler things, a kilogram of potatoes cost 5 kopecks. For a day, Vasily earned somewhere on 16-17 kilograms of potatoes. More than enough not to starve. Let's move on to apartments. There are records of renting apartments on the outskirts of Moscow. A simple one-room apartment was then rented for 5-7 rubles a month, which is about 1/4 of Vasily's income. Clothes were generally priced normally. Shoes were sold for 2 rubles, nice shirts for 3 rubles, and you could buy a good coat for 15 rubles. That's why workers often wore cotton coats or something simpler and mostly on foot, because a working horse cost 70 rubles, and a horse capable of transportation cost up to 100 rubles. Even a cow cost 60 rubles, so Vasily had no problems except for food and minimal apartment rent. Let's summarize. It is funny that in such a very average competition of quality of life won the ancient Greek Thomas. His salary looks almost the best and even in many ways unrealistic, in proportion to the costs, but do not forget that the video talks only about money and does not mention the 12-hour working days of Russian Vasily, the terrible conditions of John's barracks and the fact that teachers like Cornelius in Rome was not so much. There are always a lot of nuances in life, like the fact that if you were to go to ancient Greece, there is a 90% chance you would be a slave, because there were a lot of slaves. There is only one clear rule: rich people have always lived well, and the middle class has always been provided with food, but everything else was given with great difficulty. As you can see from our video, the situation has not changed for the better over the millennia of civilization development, and we just remind you that this video does not claim to be true and only demonstrates the prices and salaries of different historical epochs. If our video was to your liking, we will be glad to like and subscribe. Well, that's all for now. See you again, friends. Thanks for watching.